Yael Ossowski from the Consumer Center. I'm sorry, I'm losing the title of your organization.
Consumer Choice Center.
Thank you. Consumer Choice Center is joining us today to talk about this news. What was your initial reaction, Yael, when you heard about this move by the Trump administration?
Finally. It's taken a lot of time. I think this is the first time that you've actually had the federal government that has, through its orders, actually recognized that there is some medicinal use for cannabis. It's something that we've known for decades. We've got hundreds of millions of doses of people trying this stuff. And now we actually have something from the federal government. And this is still a Schedule I drug. People can still go to jail for possessing it, using it, selling it. However, this actually proves that the government is moving things along and will allow researchers to finally put their money, their skills into researching this, and we can understand much more about the medical benefits. So I think it's great, a wonderful move, and sometimes it just takes someone like Trump to make it happen.
So is it really just about research? Are there other applications? Will there be more medicinal dispensaries around the country?
So those states, so the order is, again, it's kind of a work of art. We'd love to see it completely removed from scheduling altogether. They would just kind of remove all of this and it would have a responsible regulated market. But by moving it up now, and it's actually to Schedule III, what that means is that research, yes, is opened up, but then it also means that those states that have medical cannabis will actually have those products approved, and they can actually begin to give normal business regulations to those companies, to those dispensaries, so they can start to deduct their taxes that they have for business expenses, and they're not treated fully like normal businesses, like normal hardware shops or whatever it might be, but we're moving in that direction, and that's very good for the market, it's good for consumers, and overall a pretty positive move.
Can I ask a follow on this?
Sure.
In Virginia, for example, if you go to a dispensary, you need a prescription.
Yep.
Will the state still be requiring that, or is that something that can be let go?
That will be state by state, so it will really depend on whatever either the legislature has decided or by popular referendum, as in places like Colorado and California. So nothing changes there. The only thing that changes is at the federal level, you will have the ability now to research it. So if you're a researcher working at a university, you can actually have some delivered. You're able to get federal funding. And then for business owners, people who have medicinal dispensaries, they can actually use those business expenses, as I mentioned before. They can start to take out insurance. We don't yet have federal banking reform, which is very important for cannabis, particularly a lot of companies that can only keep cash on site. So we still have this big issue between the federal government and the states, still going to be based on that state-to-state level. And then you will have slow FDA approval of cannabis-derived products as well.
I'm glad you mentioned it was reclassified for Schedule III. I misspoke before and said it was reclassified as Schedule II, but it is Schedule III, as you noted. It sounds like you're saying that this was not a big enough move, but how much of a game-changing move is this by the Trump administration?
I mean, it starts to legitimize business. It starts to legitimize something that we all know in parallel society. People have been buying cannabis on street corners, through friends, through even the dark net for many, many years. It removes it from the streets and hopefully puts it into legitimate businesses that can pay taxes, that can have employees, and it can be part of the normal markets that are age-gated, like alcohol, like tobacco, like all the rest. And we're kind of normalizing this instead of using the force of the government. We can actually have investment, and we can have people who can turn their life around, who perhaps have been harmed by the war on drugs. So I think overall it's a very good thing. Every state is going to have a different flavor. Virginia will have a different style of either a recreational or a medical market, as North Carolina or Florida or all the rest. But that's sort of the beauty of federalism.
So now this money can actually be funneled toward research. Let's talk about the benefits for people who have certain ailments or illnesses. For years and years, you've been working on this issue, and you said just before we started how much suffering basically is going to be alleviated. So tell us some of those stories from the past and where people might be able to go now and what they can do.
I think one of the largest constituencies that really has found a lot of use in cannabis have been veterans. There's been a lot of veterans and a lot of elderly patients. All the kind of early numbers that we got from states like California and from Colorado, many of the early users of this were the elder generation. So it was boomers who were using this for ailments, for pain, people who had trouble sleeping, for anxiety. And again, it's not going to be something that everyone is going to be able to use responsibly, but this is with every product, every pharmaceutical, every drug that we have. And you really have found people who, for them, it's really changed their lives. And whether people are using CBD products, which might not be as powerful as the THC products, we have now a developed market in many of these states. You do have some maturity in the business, and you will have different use cases. And the thing is now that the money is there, now that we've removed those criminal penalties, it actually means that people can research and we can get more definitive science on how this does improve some of those ailments for people.
Not everyone is a fan of this move and of the Trump administration attempting to ease access to it, and as well as psychedelics, as we saw last week. One person quoted in the Washington Post a story about these moves by the administration. Kevin Sabet, the president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, said, with this move, we're now confronted with the most pro-drug administration in our history. Policies now being dictated by marijuana CEOs, psychedelics investors, podcasters in active addiction. It's a travesty and injustice to the American people of unprecedented proportions. Yael, do you agree that this is the most pro-drug administration in our history? And what do you say to critics of this move to reclassify?
I don't think the administration is pro-drug or anti-drug. It's just pro-reality. People are using these products. They have been for a very long time. If you can change the incentives, if you can change how the government approaches this stuff, we can make all kinds of decisions for ourselves as individuals and consumers, and we operate in the system that exists. And the United States is a great country for doing business and having our individual rights respected. And I think the government is just realizing that and providing a new path. I mean, President Trump is a great change agent when it comes to this and other products. I mean, we talked about the silos. You talked about the, let's say, mushrooms. We talked about the psychedelics. I mean, the recent executive order by Trump just shows that his approach as a businessman, kind of more transactional, understanding the reality of things, I think it's to the benefit of all Americans. But there's always going to be a lot of opposition. And a lot of those are moral questions, societal questions, and I think we'll, as parents, have to make some decisions. As a father myself, that's something that you have to enforce in home. It's the same with technology. It's the same with social media. Just actually removing the hammer of prohibition in Schedule 1 is the most important thing, because you apply this to other substances, it actually does increase a lot of harm. People who end up going to jail, people who have things on their record, can't open a business, can't take out loans. It impacts a lot, and I think it has taken someone like Trump to do it, but there are many forces who'd love to see cannabis and other products even more stigmatized, even more criminalized, and that's a bad path. So Trump all the way on this.
One would presume when research starts, it's not just going to be on how many different ailments it can help and how much it can help them, but perhaps on risks as well. Mm-hmm. You would consider they would look at both. Absolutely,
and we've had some early studies in Colorado where they were just looking at intoxication generally. They were looking at car accidents. They were looking at, domestic abuse, all these different scenarios. Now we can actually have a path for reporting, for research. And this is the kind of stuff that's important, because removing that from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 means that we can actually have legitimate scientific inquiry and we can learn more about it. We can have better statistics. And at the same time, the same for psilocybin, for the mushrooms, for any of the psychoactives. The fact that Trump is willing to do it, I think, is important and good. And you have other products, substances, you have things like kratom, 7-OH, that might be scheduled very soon. So this is all kind of happening in a very strange moment. But I think Trump is really showing that he can be a leader on this. He can kind of bust up the left-right divide, and he can present a solution for Americans that I think improves society.
We've talked about some of the potential medical impacts of this. What about the economic impact? How does rescheduling or reclassifying change things economically?
I think for this, it brings a lot more certainty. So I mentioned the ability for cannabis business owners to deduct their business expenses. This is huge. Every business owner knows the amount of money that they spend on improving their business, selling to customers. It's a lot, and the way that the tax code is constructed right now means you can actually deduct those if you're in legitimate business, not available to cannabis business owners. So this is huge. And we look at recreational or medical sales. I mean, we have all the early numbers from Colorado, from California. It's a huge boon. It's a boon to states. It's a boon to the treasuries of our states. And in many of these areas, they've actually been able to fund so many great projects and programs and provide funding. I think you need to have a balance with figuring out what the taxation is, what are the licenses, but moving Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 just kind of at least removes the criminality element and using the force of government. And now we can talk about actually the business to benefit for consumers, for entrepreneurs, and for people who are no longer going to be in jail.
You know, let me ask you a question, because I've spoken to some people who have children or grandkids that are just eternally stoned. You know, I mean, they're not taking much of a break. How important is it to research the effects on developing minds in our kids, and how could it set them back potentially?
I think it's very important, and we have this, you know, with different pharmaceutical drugs. We have, you know, an entire process. We have research grants that are available. Opening it up to also cannabis will be good, because we have been running a very strange experiment in the United States since we've had medicinal marijuana introduced in California back in 2005, 2006. You know, states have been running at their own speed. There have been different types of regulatory systems. We don't know much about how the cannabis is grown, you know, what is sprayed on it in terms of pesticides, what is used for breeding. I think now to have at least more clarification on exactly how things can be grown, how things can be researched, you can look at that impact. And I think it's vitally important, and there will always be an importance there. And we're starting to normalize what this drug is, how it can be used, and especially the impact on developing brains. That's important for those who are elderly, those who've had injuries. At least now we have an avenue to do so. So really have to give kudos again to President Trump for being forward thinking on this. It's taken Democrats and Republicans many years to come to this point, and I think we do need to celebrate that.
I want to ask you about a sobering statistic from the ACLU, which says that Black people are 3.6 times more likely than white people to be arrested for marijuana possession despite using at similar rates. How can we potentially fix this racial injustice when it comes to marijuana?
And this is something that President Trump addressed a lot in his first term. So he actually has now on his staff Alice Johnson. She is the pardon czar. So she's actually been examining many federal cases of people who've been in prison for a very long time, perhaps were arrested unjustly, and Trump has been issuing pardons. And I think this is an injustice that we've had for a very long time. And you have to imagine it's not necessarily because people are using or abusing whatever particular drugs in higher numbers. It's just that it's the first interaction with police. And if your interactions with police may start with cannabis, well, then it's about your license or your taillight or any of the other thousands of kind of statutes and violations we have on the books. And it has disproportionately impacted a lot of people. And it's also class, also race. I mean, there's so many different areas. It's just given much more intrusion into our private lives, and it has deprived us of a lot of individual rights, no matter who we are. So I think it's a great first step.
I always like to ask this question. What haven't we touched on with you that you think people should know?
I think it's just that essentially the United States can be a leader here. There's only a few countries globally that have provided a kind of retail market for cannabis that is legitimate. So my own native Canada is one example starting in 2016. Uruguay is another one, but they have not created a good market. There are still a lot of people who buy illicitly in these countries because they have over-regulated those cannabis regulation markets. I actually think the United States, with its own blend, its own constitution, its own history of federalism, can provide a better model. And we have to think about, I talk about entrepreneurs and I talk about consumers, but actually using the force of competition and markets can provide us a much better way of delivering this product, researching this product, and actually having it blend with our moral values and giving parents responsibilities. The United States can be a leader on this. I think we don't think about this enough. Surprisingly, cannabis is not full-scale legal across European nations or many other places. The United States is sort of a leader here, and it can continue to be. So I think that's one last important point I wanted to mention.
Before we let you go, I want to go back to Virginia because possession of marijuana was legalized back in 2021 in Virginia, but the recreational market is illegal. Like Hillary mentioned earlier, you have to have a medical license. Now lawmakers are working to pass a bill that would open the recreational market in 2027. Just taking a look at Virginia specifically, how do you think that's going to go? Do you think that the impact of weed being legal since 2021 is going to impact the recreational market opening 6 years later at all?
Yeah, this is a sort of this funny, federalism question. And Virginia is very interesting because you have a General Assembly, you have a legislature that's very much in favor. They would like to have a well-regulated marketplace that has rules and that offers retailers and businesses all of that certainty. And then you have the governor who has sort of vetoed some elements of that plan. So there will be a recreational retail market beginning in 2027. The numbers that we have now estimate it's about $1 billion a year in revenue, which could be huge for many of these large spending plans that the governor has. There's been a lot of quibbling right now on the taxation rate. So whether it be 8% or 6%, also a cap on licenses. From my experience working on these issues in various states, we have to be modest with this. We cannot just pass huge taxes and assume everything will be okay because the illegal markets still exist. And what you do by moving things forward and providing a regulated space actually allows people to buy on the legal market where you have age checks, where you have some kind of purity testing, dosing standards. We need that. And I think that's why we need smart regulatory policy that provides incentives to do business, to have good functioning stores, competition. So I do think it will be a boon to Virginia, even for those people who don't use it. It will be great for tax programs. It will be good for your local governments. We kind of need all the revenue we could get. Let's be modest about it. But I think Virginia is taking good steps, and I think the Legislative Assembly is actually being very positive on this.
And ultimately, if cannabis is legalized, it knocks out the prices that other people who are selling it make, right? I mean, that's where they're making their money. So if you can cut off that real source of wealth for them, in essence, you can connect the dots and say fewer people are going to be dead. I mean, really.
And the more that you can do to deprive drug dealers, the cartels, things that are in the illicit, we used to say the mob, the more that you can do that, the better. And it's better for violence in society. It's better for criminality. If you can actually move things into the legal market where people can compete, we're no longer sending people to jail, you remove the incentive to engage in risky behavior as a drug dealer, but then also the added crime and weapons and guns and everything else. I think that's why it's good to have this move, because we have free consenting adults who'd like to use a product. We have people who would like to sell to them. Let's just recognize the facts that people are doing it and just remove the incentive to revert to criminality.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Yael Ossowski, the Deputy Director of the Consumer Choice Center. Thank you so much for joining us today.